Kiwi Yarns with Brodie Kane.
Kia ora te whānau, welcome to Kiwi Yarns. Today's guest is the Executive Director of Greenpeace Aotearoa and the former Green Party co-leader Russel Norman. Now, it blew my mind that you left Parliament 10 years ago. If I was guessing, I would have said 5 because it doesn't seem that long ago. But I dare say that one never really leaves politics. And Russell has a strong voice through his role at Greenpeace and as an advocate for the environment, which often sees him firing shots from outside the beehive. I'm eager to find out the difference between the two roles he's so well known for here. Russel Norman, the proud agitator and activist, welcome to Kiwi Yarns.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. How are you is the first question that everyone gets.
I'm pretty good. I've just been away and I've just come back and I've been back in the ocean, so I'm really happy to be doing some swimming.
Did you do a midwinter swim? Is that a thing that you do?
I swim right through winter.
Right.
I don't stop. Just put on more layers of wetsuits.
So are you a good swimmer?
No, I'm okay. I mean, I can do the rangitoto. I did the rangitoto to St Heliers Bay over summer, and I think I did an hour and a half on that, which was okay. I'm an okay swimmer, but I really like it.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to start with a bit of a saying, just alluding to the intro that I was talking about, that you never really leave politics. And there's that tent saying where they say that it's better to have you in the tent pissing in, in the tent pissing out, as opposed to out of the tent pissing in. But I would dare say, and I'm curious to know, now that you are outside, what is the difference in the way that you operate in terms of politically? Because do you feel that you have as much of an impact not being right in the thick of it?
I think you can have impact on both sides. I mean, it's not a proper answer, but so you can do it at either end. But the truth is, if you want to make progressive change, you really need a mobilised civil society because there's so many vested interests trying to stop change. Business largely. So if you want to really make the world a better place, you really need an engaged civil society. And so where I work now in civil society is a point of where you've got energy to actually drive change. If you're in politics, you can make change, and it's important there. But without the power coming out of civil society, you've really got no way to drive through change.
I've got lots of questions about when you left and whatnot, but when you left, was part of that decision around that in terms of, I need to be more immersed with, for want of a better term, real people?
Not really. I mean, I'd done my 10 years in politics, so yeah, it was time to do something else.
Oh, okay, that's fair enough. Before we crack in with all sorts of questions, actually, I did have to laugh, though. At the top of your Wikipedia page, it does say not to be confused with English restaurateur Russel Norman. First of all, can you cook?
I can cook, though not as well, obviously, as the other Russel Norman. Yes, so he died.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah, not so long ago, and there was some confusion as to whether I was dead or alive. But I am here, and I'm sorry for him. But
you can cook.
I can cook, but yeah.
Okay. Do you have a signature meal?
Puttanesca really is my signature meal.
Okay, fantastic. As I said as well, I can't believe that it's been 10 years. Doesn't feel like that long ago to me. Does it feel that long ago to you?
Yes, it does. So it feels like I've had an amazing 10 years. So yeah. I mean, there's many things I love about my current role, but one of the things I love about it is I'm really not so identifiable. So one of the things I found really difficult when I was in politics was that people would recognise you in various places, whereas I just don't get recognised so much anymore, hardly at all, which is fantastic. So I can just do my own thing, whereas, I always felt a bit identified.
Yeah. Fair enough. Do you miss, is there anything that you miss from being involved in politics in that way?
I really miss question time. So the Parliament's mostly theatre, and it's pretty scripted, and not much happens. But question time can be very different. What I mean, not much happens, is that not much happens that isn't predetermined. The votes are already predetermined. The speeches don't change anything. But the one thing that's not scripted fully and not predetermined is question time. I used to love question time because it was an opportunity to really debate and put your wits to test against the government at the time, which was, I started with Clark and then we had Key, and really hold them to account. Because even though the way it works in question time is the primary questions are all notified to the ministers, but the supplementary questions aren't. And so we developed this technique where we focused all our supplementary questions on one question, and so then we could have a really extensive deep dive cross-examination of a particular minister, and so they wouldn't really know which minister it was going to be, and then we could get right into it. And we also got lucky because we had Lockwood Smith as our speaker. Now, Lockwood, the thing about Lockwood was I don't think he was a great education minister and all that's when he was education minister, but as speaker he decided that ministers should answer questions, which was absolutely novel because the previous speakers had all ruled that ministers only have to address the question, which can mean anything, right? Whereas he ruled that speakers had to answer questions, and the government hated it, but he backed us as an opposition to try to force ministers to answer questions. And so I really enjoyed that. That was great.
Was there anyone when you look back, is there a particular question time or someone that you remember having over the ropes that's like a fond memory?
Well, there was lots, but I remember poor old Bill English when he was Minister of Finance and he didn't know what a current account deficit was. And I did rather cruelly ask him about it and drag it out at some length. There was also, when we were asking Helen Clark about, there was this really obscure trade agreement which will excite everyone, called the General Agreement on Trade and Services, the GATS. And the GATS, under the GATS, New Zealand was making commitments to open up early childhood education and other kinds of areas for competition and restricting the ability of governments to regulate and stuff. So we were able to use question time to put a lot of pressure on the government. That was Rod Donald. I was working with Rod on that when he was still alive. It was great. We also did some, as you may remember, it was also John Key. There was all the spy stuff. Mm-hmm. So you had the Snowden revelations going on. And so New Zealand, of course, was implicated in all of that. And so that was really great. It all got a bit waylaid by the Kim.com disaster. Yep. Not disparaging Kim, but it became a bit of a sideshow to the core issue, which was, is the government unlawfully spying on us? And so we were able to ask a lot of questions to Key about that and put a lot of pressure on him.
What do you not miss about working in Parliament?
Well, the hours were pretty inhospitable, and yeah, that did make it really difficult. The other thing I think about it compared to my current role is you had to cover everything. And so it was hard to focus on some of the ecological and environmental issues. So I did do a lot on that, heaps and heaps on that, but you kind of have to be able to respond on every issue, every public issue of the day. And often it wasn't necessarily something that you wanted to spend a lot of time on, but it might be the issue that's of interest. So you ended up spending time on it.
When you signed off, you left saying we are all entitled to be agitators and we should exercise that entitlement frequently. I intend to do so. Can we talk about what that means to you, what it means to be an agitator?
Yeah, an agitator is someone who stirs the pot, who basically identifies things that they think are wrong in society or in the world. Obviously, not everyone agrees with you. And then tries to drive change. It's not so different to a campaigner, right? It's a kind of synonym for a campaigner. And so it seemed to me that there's a really important role if our societies are to get better and also to address some of the really big challenges, and particularly the environmental challenges that we have. We need a lot more agitators and a lot more stirring the pot because, we're headed off a bit of a cliff with business as usual, so we have to change course. And to change course, this big system of capitalism we have is driving us towards this cliff. And so we really do need to have lots more agitators to change direction.
It's funny because that was going to be my next question. Should more people people be agitators, but how are there varying degrees? Like if people are, I get the sense as well with the current global climate that lots of people are really unhappy with the status quo. What are some ways that you would advise? Because obviously, so much of us can sit on our phones and doom scroll and think, oh my goodness, what can I do? But what are some of the things? I dare say some people might be born with that fire in their belly, and I dare say you might be one of those. But for people at home that might feel really passionate about something, what are some real grassroots way that you can dabble in being an agitator?
So firstly, I only stumbled into activism. It wasn't a natural thing for me at all. So my family are working class people from the suburbs of Brisbane in Queensland.
Yeah.
And, our whole suburb was housing commission. We were housing commission people. My oldest sister became a primary teacher. My brother Peter, he worked in the main roads department as a soil tester, and then eventually ended up building roads. My other brother Richard, he's a bit of a surfer, and then he became a builder, and then a manager builder. Alan's a fitter and turner, worked for the gas pipeline industry in Northern Territory. Sandra, my sister, worked in the bank. So we were very standard people. There was no activists in my street. No one went to university, that's for sure. But what happened to me was we had Joh Bjelke-Petersen, who was this incredibly right-wing and terrible premier of Queensland, who was very anti-democratic. He banned street marches. You weren't allowed to march down the street. And so, I ended up kind of just getting annoyed by that, really, and getting dragged into activism. But in terms of what you can do, so I have a PhD in political science, right? So it's not really a science at all, of course, politics. But I have a PhD.
Yeah. I don't have a PhD. Sorry.
So just to give you my take on how the thing works, so think about three spheres, right? So you can think about the state, right, over here. You can think about the economy over here, and civil society over here. In the state, you have the government departments are the actors in that space, as well as politicians, particularly government departments. In the economy, you have businesses, right, who are the actors over there. But in civil society, you have the not-for-profits, the NGOs, the non-government organisations like Greenpeace. Without those organising parts of civil society, it's very difficult for civil society to really affect change. Because like you say, we're all pissed off with something looking at our phones, but if we're all isolated and separated, our power is pretty small. So the most important thing people can do is actually support NGOs, either financially or joining them or get active in them or whatever. But the idea that we will change the world through individuals, us all being completely atomised, I think is not a powerful strategy. So you really, if people want to see progressive change, then really it's essential to support the organisations of civil society.
Do you think that, I guess, post-pandemic, there's sort of an irony in it that we all went into lockdowns, the world kind of closed down for a bit, and to start with, there was this real kind of positive feeling of, gosh, we've all got more time and we can connect with our loved ones, and there was a sense of community because you were all at home and all of that. And I wonder whether us all lurching out of that is that we've kind of lost our way. I kind of tend to hope that people are actually falling back into wanting that human connection and community now. But do you think we maybe lost our, the general we, lost our way a bit there with being sort of, post-COVID, just focus on me and getting things right and all of that kind of thing?
I don't know. There's a lot going on in the picture you painted, right? So one of them is the digitalisation of everyday life, mm-hmm. right? So that, again, COVID accelerated that, right? Because we all went online. And I love the digital world. I'm totally into it. I was, co-chair of the Global Digital Committee for Greenpeace and all this kind of stuff. But I also do think that there's a bit of a reaction now about that, where people are hankering for more human contact, which I think is great. I think the digital world's here to stay, and it's only going to go further and further. But we are, I think it's a really healthy thing, do want more real life context. So I think that's a really positive thing. The other thing that's rolling over this whole period, of course, is this kind of second wave of neoliberalism. So if neoliberalism is this far-right ideology that New Zealand had in the 1980s and 90s, deregulation, reducing state power, privatisation, giving more power to business, less power to civil society. So that happened in the 80s and 90s. And then there was a kind of response to that through the late 90s until, let's say, 2000 and... I don't know. So you got the 2008 maybe, or even the Key government didn't really push neoliberalism very hard, and the Clark government was pushing back a bit against neoliberalism. But what we're seeing now is this kind of re-empowered far right, and we're seeing it obviously with Donald Trump, who's kind of epitomises it, but we're seeing it here with the current New Zealand government, this kind of far right re-powered neoliberal kind of drive to deregulate and remove civil society power and strip away democratic rights. So we're kind of, that's kind of overlaid this thing as we've gone through the COVID and the COVID experience and then the kind of digitalisation of everyday life. So I think that what we're going to see, or what I hope we're going to see, is kind of a new push for people who will say, actually, we want to protect democracy from this far-right attack. We want to protect our civil liberties. We want to protect civil society organisations. And if you look in what happened in the United States, just in the last 2 weeks, the No Kings protests against Donald Trump were the biggest single-day protest in American history, right? 4 to 6 million people protested that day. It is a massive pushback against Donald Trump and the Trump-like elements in the current New Zealand government. So, and in New Zealand, we've had a huge pushback with the Treaty Principles Bill. We're seeing it now with the Regulatory Standards Bill, which is another far-right bill. We're seeing it with the whole attack on nature. So anyway, so that's a long answer to say I think that we are hopefully seeing opportunities for people to actually re-engage in democratic space.
I know, I love long answers like that because it leads me to... I'm going to move to a part, though, that I think's probably timely for here then. Let's talk about, like, the political spectrum. Let's talk about left-wing, centre-left, right-wing, far-right. In your mind, is this part of the... Gosh, I'm going to go deep, but, like, if we look at the political spectrum, it's always going to exist, right? Like, as far as our lives... the grandkids' lives, it's always going to be there?
Yeah.
So is it then, is it one of the major issues in terms of what we see right now if we're looking at the rise in things that are moving further away from the centre? Yeah? Yeah.
So if you think, there's a very interesting thing, I think, what's happened over the last decade or so. And I'm particularly interested in the sustainability dimension to all of this, right? I'm very interested in the social justice stuff, but looking at it from a sustainability dimension, right? So we kind of, like, if you go back 10 years, you had these various right-wing actors who said we had to take climate change seriously. Right, and it was, there was a lot. Thomas Friedman, there was lots of books written about it. It was very interesting, and I was certainly one who was a bit taken in by that. So I was interested in, okay, climate change is an existential risk for the human race, not to mention the destruction of biodiversity. There are these various right-wing people who say they want to take it seriously. They just want to use market mechanisms to resolve it rather than regulation. Okay. If you're serious about it, I'm willing to talk. And there was a period where there was an engagement around that. Then you fast forward to now, and the right are now associated with climate science denial, more oil and gas exploration, accelerated destruction of biodiversity. As Shane Jones said, if there's a frog in the way of a mining, then goodbye, Freddie. He doesn't care to drive it to extinction if it means that he can have a gold mine. And so now the right has moved away from any kind of commitment around its sustainability, and we've ended up with I think a much more simplified political spectrum where you've got this far right, which is not only terrible on social justice, but has now become absolutely terrible on climate change and biodiversity. It wasn't like that 10 years ago. It was more complicated and more interesting and had more possibility. But this is what's happened. And now the left tends to be associated with not only social justice issues, but also all the sustainability, climate and biodiversity issues. I would love it if the right emerged, if a new part of the right would emerge that says, actually, we're serious about climate change, but that is not what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing the opposite, whereby they are doubling down on their commitments to oil and gas and coal and all the rest of it.
Could you give people an idea of what you think the fundamental differences are along that political spectrum?
Yeah, so it's around the role of collective action, right? So if you think about the state, not in the form of like bureaucracies, but in the form of it is the way that we come together to achieve our collective common good, right? There are some things that you cannot do as an individual and that businesses cannot or will not do. So to use an example, think about the ozone layer, right? We depend on the ozone layer for life on Earth. It protects us from dangerous ultraviolet radiation. Now, there were these companies producing CFCs. They made money out of it, and it destroyed the ozone layer. That was a threat to life on Earth, right? Those companies were absolutely opposed to stopping the production of those chemicals, even though it was destroying the thing that protected us, right? So we collectively got together as societies and said through our government, our collective agent who works for us, you must tell the companies to stop producing these dangerous chemicals. And that had to happen globally. So it wasn't just at one government level, it was kind of a global collective effort. And collectively, as a global community, we came together, used laws and draconian regulation, right, which is such a terrible thing. Yes, we used regulation and forced by law, and we said we will arrest you if you do not do this. You must stop production of these chemicals that are dangerous to the ozone layer and hence dangerous to life on Earth. That idea of collective action is a left-wing idea, right? And even more so now, it seems, than ever. The right-wing idea says, no, businesses should be free to do what they want. They own those factories. They should be allowed to produce those chemicals. It is their profit-making right to do that. And you should not use this terrible government thing to force them to do something they don't want to do. Think of their freedom. Right? It is a restriction on their freedom to produce CFCs, which is true. It is a restriction on their freedom to produce CFCs, and it's in order to maximise the freedom of all of us not to live covered in cancer because of UV rays and destruction of everything else. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of at the heart of the difference between the two spectrums. And the problem we now find ourselves in is that environmental issues all require collective responses. You think about climate change, there is no individual solution to climate change, there's only collective solutions, which means you end up, as we found ourselves now, where the right just don't want to be engaged in this process anymore.
Would you say that there has been, we could say locally or potentially globally, centrist politics and even the fringes, centre left, centre right. Do you think that there has been, I don't know, maybe a level of complacency for too long, maybe even an arrogance for too long, which has also driven a wedge between probably a large group of people who may not disagree on too many things, but maybe some, give or take, which has driven people further to the extremes of both sides?
I'd say that there has been a loss of consensus, right, which is another way of agreeing with you in a roundabout way. And so I'd look at it, I'd say you've got to think about this back to a century ago, right, the 1930s, right, which set the agenda for a lot of what happened afterwards, right, the Great Depression. So the Great Depression was driven by unregulated financial capital, and then FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, re-regulated capitalism. Same thing happened here with the first Labor government, same thing thing happened, the Chifley government in Australia and many other places, right? So you go into the post-Second World War period of great prosperity whereby the state regulated the most rapacious parts of capitalism. It didn't abolish capitalism, but it regulated it tightly, particularly financial capital, and that led to increases in wages, very high growth in productivity, relatively big consensus across the political spectrum about this model of regulating the economy for the benefit of people. And it was incredible, right? There's never been a period of prosperity for humans like that period. But business hated it, right? Because it involved quite significant restrictions on what they were allowed to do, and they always agitated against it. And by the 1980s and 1990s, various kind of economic challenges then created the opportunity where the neoliberal revolution could happen, where they said, right, this is our chance. The thing about the neoliberal revolution is that it resulted in mass poverty, right? Everywhere it was applied, you get more and more poverty and inequality. And we are the inheritors of that now, right? So in the 2020s. And so now we've inherited these societies where there are huge inequalities, right? In all of these Western countries now. And it's very problematic. And so you've seen this breaking apart of the centre and the consensus. So the social democratic consensus that existed for all those years that kind of, I think, forms a lot of our mindset for how we imagine the world is, of what's normal, is the post-war social democratic consensus where most people agreed on what the policy should be. But that all got torn apart. And we're now back in a period much more like the 1930s where there is massive inequality and huge argument about what we should do about it, and extremely aggressive push by business and multinational companies to say, we will not accept your regulation, we are protecting our freedom. And they fund all of those organisations like the Atlas Network, which obviously the ACT Party here is affiliated to, the New Zealand Institute, which is the descendant of the Business Roundtable. So all of that is funded by these large business corporations who do not want any regulation. And the Koch brothers, of course, you know, in some ways in the United States, which is this fossil fuel company, they typify this problem whereby they go, we are committed to fossil fuels, we're going to do it regardless, we don't want any restrictions on what we do, we will fund climate denialism, we'll do the whole thing, we will fund these far-right organisations like the Atlas Network and all of those in order to make sure that there cannot be a policy consensus on taking collective action to protect our collective interests in a stable climate.
Talk a bit more then about capitalism and what that is doing in terms of Western civilization and the environment. So are we too comfortable in an environment where we're like, well, I would like all of these nice things and it really is just a bit inconvenient that I'm going to have to think about my petrol or hop on a bus or ride a bike, or, you know, do you think that people are too comfortable in a life that we have lived for a long time, and that there is just a sort of a complacency to thinking, oh gosh, it's just a bit too hard. It's just a bit too hard. I like my nice things. I like money. I like...
Maybe, I don't know. So if you look at the polling on climate change, right, there are super majorities pretty much everywhere for action on climate change, right? You wouldn't believe it from the, you know, a lot of the, I don't want to blame the media because I don't think it's fair, but there is a lot of amplification of climate denial voices in our society because they've got the money, right? But when you look at actually, you poll people, do you want action on climate change? Like you're talking 80%, right? Or 70 to 80% of people want governments to take action on climate change. And so when you take action on a lot of those issues, yes, you obviously will have voices who don't like it, right? So fuel efficiency standard on cars, there are some people who don't want those things, right? But the vast majority of people do, right? And are willing to accept them. Cycleways, they can be controversial on occasion, but when you look at, if you ever travel to any of those European cities with those cycle networks, they are super popular. Once you build them, the number of people using them just escalates dramatically. So yes, people do have certain reservations about change, that's true, but it's also true that there are super majorities who want change in order to deal with climate change and to bring in policies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I do think that it's exaggerated, the voices of opposition to climate policy, and the reason it's exaggerated is because it's backed by billionaires who support those voices and those groups.
So back to the spectrum again for a moment. Are you concerned that because there's so, well, you know, there has been a lot of bickering and potentially, probably, my observation, amplified from COVID, where people are angry, people are pissed off, people feel whatever they might feel about COVID, how it was handled, what the world looks like now. We sometimes, well, I can speak personally, I feel like at the time I probably drowned out in my own echo chamber of what I believed was right and the right things to do. And you probably lost a bit of the art of, a good debate or conversation. And I took it upon myself, you know, once we sort of got back into the swing of things, to go, right, you can't just sit and listen to everyone that you agree with. We have to be able to have conversations with people. And so how do we then, you know, to prevent like the extreme sides of both, how do we actually go, again, let's go back to that notion of most of us kind of are good people and want relatively the same things. I've got a mate down in Christchurch. We will sit for hours and we'll go toe to toe. He sits this side, I sit a little bit this side. We'll go toe to toe over a couple of gins. Fundamentally, we kind of want the same things, just have different ways to get there. So how do you, when you're carrying out your mahi and, have a stake in the ground about where you sit and what you believe to be right, how do you bring those conversations in with people to get that collective back to thinking relatively the same way?
So, I mean, to put the role of people like me in Greenpeace, right? So, we are advocates of a certain position, right? And I believe that it's essential to have advocates of strong positions in society in order to, I think it's just a healthy part of democracy. But it's also true that we need the institutions of democracy to provide the spaces whereby people can engage. And so that's why we have a whole bunch of norms around select committee processes and parliamentary processes and also media and kind of the right of people to kind of have their opinions heard and to engage with each other. And so I am a very strong supporter and always have been. I think there were some things done under COVID. You could argue that it probably didn't help that in terms of some of the ways that it was treated at certain times, and particularly the dissenters, right? Because you think about the way the dissenters were treated with the putting on of the sprinkler system and, on the Parliament thing, and the use of the noise and all the rest of it, and the unwillingness to meet them and all that kind of stuff. So I think you could argue about whether that really helped kind of build that kind of sense of democratic culture. And so we have a responsibility to respect that democratic culture. Now, within that, of what a democratic culture looks like, it is undoubtedly true that all the progressive changes that have ever happened have involved people using peaceful civil disobedience and non-violent direct action. How did women get the vote? How did we defeat apartheid? Big things like that involve people using quite strong, having quite strong opinions and putting themselves in a peaceful way in harm's way. So like the oil and gas exploration ban, which we won in New Zealand recently, right, in 2018. I went and swam in the ocean in front of one of those giant oil and gas exploration ships, like 100 kilometres off Napier. It was 22,000 tonnes, right, 188 metres long. It had an array out the back, 7 kilometres long and 2 kilometres wide. It was looking for oil, right, and we swam in front of it in order to disrupt it, right? I think that in a democratic society, we have to be tolerant of peaceful civil disobedience, even by people we disagree of, because it's important. It's an important part of how change happens. But we also need to make sure we have the space where people can talk to each other. I agree with that, and that's why we have those basic institutions. Some of the things that the current government is doing, where basically you see Seymour saying, these people are deranged. If they disagree with me, they must be deranged, right? That's his current position. They're all bots. They're all the submissions, hundreds of those of submissions against his bills. They're all bots. They're not real people, right? So he is removing people's humanity, right? When those kind of allegations are made, he's saying these aren't real people. They don't count. I don't have to listen to them, right? That is the pathway to dictatorship, right? Once you go, there are all these people that don't count, they're actually bots. You are saying, I don't have to listen to those people because they don't have full humanity. And that is the pathway to lose our democracy and our civil rights. So I think it's very important that we retain a commitment to respect the humanity of the people we disagree with. No doubt I myself have been, fallen foul of that particular standard at various times, but it is certainly a standard that we should hold ourselves up to, even when we're advocating for change.
Do you think it's one of those things as well where if we're taking the world right now, the world's in quite a dire state. And I said to you before we recorded, I was like, we can't ignore the dire state, but we're not going to make this whole podcast doom and gloom. But if we're taking the state of it right now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, okay, so I see and I go, right, surely it can't get any worse than times before. So everyone's going to realise that at some point, and we're all going to go, right, no, cool, no. Stuff that we're back on the good ways. Like, does that kind of help you sleep at night, that you think that we're surely humanity is not going to let it go to places that it has been before?
I always think of the people in the 1930s, right? What must it have been like?
Yeah.
They were facing fascism, just like when we are facing fascism now, right? Let's not put in, there is a serious attack on democracy now underway in our country, but also more particularly in the United States and in other places. So some of the foundations that we grew up with and we thought were safe are not safe. So they were facing consistent attacks on trade unions, on minority groups. You think what happened to the Jews in Europe, and it started before the 1930s. All around the world, these different groups were under attack. And the people in the 1930s who stood up and fought fascism, they had no idea if they would win. They didn't know if they were going to win. I mean, and we had actual fascists in New Zealand. We had actual fascists in all of the United States. They had fascist parties, right? So it wasn't just a German thing. And so the people that had to fight for democracy back then, they fought for it without the knowledge that we had that they were going to win. Like, we look back on it now and go, oh, they won. Of course they were always going to win, right? They didn't know they were going to win. They thought they could lose, but they fought anyway. And that's what we have to do. We are literally fighting for our democracy now. And so we can't guarantee that it's going to win. There is absolutely no guarantee. All we know is if we don't fight, we will definitely lose. That's the one thing we can be sure of.
Oh, yeah, great. Oh, that's good. That's good motivation. Talk about democracy more directly in New Zealand. I know that even 10 years ago, as you were in Parliament giving your valedictory speech, and you had your concerns about the state of democracy then, and I dare say you have your concerns about that now. Can you explain what those concerns are?
So democracy isn't just about getting to vote once every 3 years, as important as that is. It's all the kind of culture around it as to what's acceptable and what's tolerated in society. What are the behaviours that are okay? What is the way that it's okay to treat people and to just talk about people? Is it okay to just ignore hundreds of thousands of submissions and go, I don't care, they can say whatever they like? Is it okay to suppress information, basically to essentially thwart the Official Information Act, right, which is what's become common practice now? Without those kind of democratic cultures and practices, the way the current government talks about the judicial system and, just dismisses it if it doesn't like the decisions, the way you hear Shane Jones talk about it. And so there's a lot of cultural aspects around the way democracy works. We have a parliamentary system with very few checks in it. There's no upper house. Basically, if you get a majority in the parliament, you form the executive, but it means that parliament has no real proper oversight of the executive branch of government. And so, a lot of it relies on democratic culture and practice, and that's what's being degraded, in particularly under this government. And it, it's largely, Luxon himself doesn't have a particularly strong understanding or commitment of democratic culture. That's not his background. He's come out of the corporate world where if you're the boss, you get to tell people how it goes, right? Corporations don't work like democracies. and likewise with the other two parties in their ACT and New Zealand First, they're not, democracy is not their deep commitments, and they have certain cultural practices which I think corrode at democracy, the way they talk about people and treat people. So I do think that our democracy is at risk from a lot of the peripheral stuff that's happening around it. On top of that, what we're seeing is the prosecution of activists is happening a lot more. It's happening here, but even more so in Australia, the UK, the United States. So a lot of people are now being prosecuted for what used to be considered activism. Of course, famously, Greenpeace in the United States just got sued by an oil company and lost a case for $660 million because of our support for an anti-oil pipeline protest. So there is, I think, this kind of widespread attack on both democratic norms coming out of the corporate sector, but also coming from the political sector. Now, the great thing, I think, is that people are really fighting back, not only in the United States, but here. We had 20,000 people on the March for Nature. We had hundreds of thousands of submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill, Regulatory Standards Bill, like we were talking about before. So there is, I think, a strong commitment amongst the people of this country, but elsewhere as well, to try to protect their democracy. And that will decide it. That will be the decider. If civil society insists that this is not acceptable and that they will fight against it, and we have enough organised resistance like that, then we will save our democracy. We won't save it forever, because these pressures coming to subvert democracy, they never end, right? You don't ever win democracy forever. Right? You only win it for now, and then people that come after us will have to fight to keep it. Right? But if we don't keep it, if we don't fight, then that's really hard for the people. It's hard to get a democracy if you don't have one. It's a lot easier to keep one when you got one, even if it degrades a bit, to fight to improve it. Once you lose it, it's pretty hard. I mean, when I grew up in Queensland, which was a sort of democracy, but because of the gerrymander system, the government, the National Party, curiously also called the National Party government then, only needed a third of the vote to get a majority of seats in the parliament. So it was very hard to beat them when they already had such a big gerrymander in place. So the further a democracy degrades, the harder it is to get it back. And that's the kind of historic challenge that we have, is we're going to have, this thing's already a bit degraded. How do we make sure it doesn't degrade further so that the people that come after us don't have a tougher job?
It's a funny world, isn't it? Funny old bunch of things we are roaming around playing these games and the cycles that they go in. Let's go back to you growing up in Australia and in working class Brisbane and with all your siblings. And interesting, because you said definitely weren't born an agitator and an accidental agitator. But would you think though that maybe your upbringing and gave you a sense of where you sit in the world?
For sure. I mean, but it wasn't as an activist. There were no I never knew an activist.
Right.
Yeah. But yes. So my father was like one of them guys, born in 1930. Right. My parents are dead now, but they were both born in 1930, and he was one of those people who took advantage of the post-war boom and opportunities and got an education, right? So he became a fitter and turner, which was a huge step forward for his family. He got a trade. Then he got his Boilermaker ticket, and we worked with the family, went up to North Queensland and worked in the sugar refineries, Then he came back to Brisbane and managed to get, he studied to get an engineering degree, right? Unheard of. No one else in my street had a degree, right? Except my dad.
Yeah.
And so he was someone who embraced the Enlightenment. He just said, we're going to have every book you want. We had all the religious books in the house. He said, I'm an agnostic, but read whatever you like. Here's the Bhagavad Gita. Here's the Bible. Here's the Quran. Take whatever you like, right? So, so that really gave me, it was like, wow, he broke through the idea that we are not trapped by our history and our ancestors, that we can think for ourselves, right? Which is an Enlightenment idea. Many other cultures, of course, have had the same idea. It's not only an Enlightenment idea, but in our culture, or my culture, the kind of the European culture in which I was kind of born into, that the Enlightenment was a breach with the idea that the church determined your whole worldview, right? That's what it was fighting against. And so he was very much a product of that. It's like, I'm not going to be constrained by a religious worldview. I'm going to think, and he was into science, and I'm totally crazy about science, and so he kind of created an opportunity. Him and my mother, my mum, she brought up 6 kids in that kind of world, whereby we could think for ourselves. As much as any of us manage it. So yes, that did create a framework, but it wasn't an activist one because we just never heard of activists.
That certainly, though, sounds to me like, and I guess this is an assumption, but for you, having that as an opportunity to learn and a value put on the importance of education and education for all.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. So it was a huge deal for us.
Yeah.
I mean, but see, my school, there was 300 kids in my year at school. Only 3 or 4 of us went to university. It just wasn't done back then. It was a state school in a working class area. And then when I got to university, I did medicine when I first went to university. There was 300 or something of us in the first year of medicine. There was 10 of us that went to state schools. Everyone else went to private schools. And so it was that was a real shock because it was oh, wow, there's this hierarchy and kind of class structure really, which had never really been so present to me because everyone I knew was like us. Suddenly I went to university and it was wow, everyone's gone to private education and they've all got money. I mean, we had some money because, but we weren't super poor or anything, but wow, they had money.
Yeah. When you were at university, and you obviously you were studying medicine, didn't follow that through. Do you ever think back about what happened if you'd carried on that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I should. I probably should have. My mother always said to me, she was very disappointed because I was the first one of the kids to go to university. Because there's 6 of us, right? I was the first one to go. I was the last and one who went to university. And so my mother was so happy about it. And my father had died by then. And then I dropped out and it broke her heart. Oh. And so yeah, I do often think maybe I should have stuck with it and become a specialist and all of that life.
Wonder what the conversation would be like today. It'd be fascinating to think about. But I mean,
I wouldn't be a trouble causer.
No, I don't know if you would be an agitator. Yeah, but talk to me about moving to New Zealand, and that was around 1997, and a politically motivated decision. You were looking at the Red-Green Alliance. Is that sort of what lured you?
Yeah. So after I left medicine, I went and I worked in factories because that's what I knew. I was a fitter, did sheet metal work for a while, and then I worked at the Mitsubishi factory putting on the making cars in Adelaide, right front door lock for quite a while.
Did you say right front door lock?
Right front door lock.
Right front door lock. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
And then I thought, I should go back to university. This is crazy, right? So I did, and I went back and I studied, right? So when I went back to university, I got very, by then I was super political.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was very interested in New Zealand because New Zealand was the epitome of the New Right Revolution, but it also had these very interesting resistance to it, right? Which was the Alliance Party, which was a red, green, brown coalition, and also New Zealand First, right? As much as I disagree with New Zealand First about many things, there's no question that it was an old right resistance to the new right, right? Very interesting. And so New Zealand had these very interesting resistance to this revolution, the New Right Revolution, the neoliberal revolution, as I call it. Anyway, so I got very interested in studying it. And so then I had some mates who lived on Waiheke, New Zealanders who I'd met in Adelaide. And so they said, why don't you come over here and study it some more? So I did. And so I ended up doing my thesis on I'm the world, literally the world expert on the New Zealand Alliance Party.
And then you've been here ever since.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
One thing led to another.
Do you do you have a strong connection still with Australia, or is New Zealand very much feel like your whakapapa?
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand does feel like home, and I've got 3 kids, and they're obviously we're all up here in Auckland with my partner, but Australia and New Zealand don't feel wildly different. They are significantly different, but there's a lot that's the same as well. They're colonial societies, largely settled by Europeans. There's a lot of similarities between the two societies. So neither of them feel wildly foreign to me. But I've lived here a long time now. I've been here a quarter of a century, and yeah, I mean, I've been extremely happy here.
Yeah. What is your favourite thing about Aotearoa?
Well, it's the land of the birds, right? I mean, there's nowhere else where the birds are king, right? So everywhere else it's the mammals. Here it's the birds. Incredible, right? So all the ecological niches got filled by birds. There's a few reptiles, which are really amazing reptiles as well, like the tuataras, the incredible
amazing.
reptile.
Yeah.
But the birds just filled all of the ecological niches. In other places you'd have mice. In New Zealand you had the St. Stephen's Island sparrow, whatever it was, that crawled around, and flightless sparrow, which got driven extinct by the lighthouse keeper's cat, But there are all these incredible birds in all these different ecological niches. I really love that. I think that it shows that, what determines evolutionary kind of outcomes is the kind of the environment around it, and any kind of species can fill all those different ecological niches that we normally think are filled by mammals. Everywhere else they are filled by mammals. Even in Australia, they're monitory mammals and marsupial mammals rather than placental mammals, but they're still mammals. In New Zealand, there's no mammals, right, except for the bats, right, and the sea mammals, obviously, but there's just 2 species of bat that probably got blown over here by the wind anyway. So, it's amazing that birds can fill all those ecological niches, and they really are something.
Wow, that's cool. That's a cool answer. Let's talk about your time in the Green Party and as co-leader. Can you explain the kaupapa of the Green Party and whether it's the same now as when you were in has it changed? What does the Green Party mean?
I don't think it's fundamentally changed. When Rod and Jeanette, Jeanette Fitzsimons and Rod Donald as the first co-leaders, and then there was a lot of people before them as well. I mean, stacks of amazing people when the Values Party and set up the Greens. The kaupapa that they set up, which was, the 4 pillars: social justice, environmental sustainability, grassroots democracy and non-violence, then kind of got added to with the treaty. That kind of came later. It wasn't really there that strongly at the beginning. It was there, but it became much more central. So they ended up with kind of 5 pillars, really. I think those 5 pillars still orient that party. I mean, I haven't been a member of the Greens for a decade, but I think they're still very strongly animated by those 5 principles.
Success. I'm going to read out a few things that your colleagues have said about your success whilst there. Work with the party and other organisations to get a referendum on the government's asset sales, successfully fighting to keep Kiwi Bank locally owned, and your work alongside community organisations to campaign for cleaner rivers. James Shaw said one of Russell's greatest achievements was his ability to communicate an alternative economic vision for New Zealand, one where the economy worked for everyone and which sustained the environment rather than destroyed it. Are these things that you're proud of?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of specific things we did. So it's interesting thinking about the conversation we just had before about the right. So we worked with the Key government. So we delivered a $400 million home insulation program with the Key government. We delivered the Cycleways project and various other projects. And that was an attempt by us to try to find that common ground with the right when it existed. And I was a very strong believer that we had a responsibility to our society and to people that came after us, that if we had the opportunity to work with the right-wing parties on environmental issues, then we should grab it with both hands.
Yeah.
And so we did try to do that. It's just very hard to see how you do that now because they've become so hostile to it. But back then we did have an opening and we tried to take it. The other one that we started with the Clark government was the City Rail Link. So the CRL project up here is very important for the transformation of Auckland. It's a long story, but it took quite a lot of wrangling to get that project over the line and quite a lot of hard-knuckled negotiations because there were a lot of opponents to it. But kind of like at one level, one of the probably, if you were to say, one of the most important things was we had to solidify the idea of a green identity and a green corner of the politic as an enduring presence. And that was one of the challenges at the beginning, because when I started, if you remember the 2005 election, you may not remember the 2005 election, that was the Exclusive Brethren.
That's my first time I voted.
Right.
Yep.
So I was the campaign manager for that election for the Greens, and the Exclusive Brethren came out of the blue and launched this massive attack on us. And Stephen Joyce was the campaign manager for the National Party who'd been talking to the Exclusive Brethren, and so they launched this huge attack on us, and we were lucky to survive just over 5%. Right, it was very close, and Don Brash nearly became the Prime Minister. There was only 50,000 votes in it. It was so tight.
Is this the interest-free student loan? Yeah. No.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Sorry, this is my second. No, right. I'm thinking of the one before was interest-free student loan. Carry on.
Anyway, so the Greens only just managed to survive. Like it was as tight as. Anyway, so then Rod Donald died suddenly, right? Terrible. And the party was in disarray. We didn't have anyone to replace Rod. And so we all looked around and we all went, who's going to do it? And so I ended up having to do it because someone had to do it. And I was completely I'm an Australian, I'm an introvert, I'm not I'm like, it's as if you'd put me up to be in that role, right? But I think I was the best person. Like the other people were great, like Nandor ran for co-leader as well. I really respect Nandor, he was great. But for whatever reason, I was probably the best person to do that role. And so my responsibility was to try to make sure that we didn't disappear and in fact that we grew over time and cemented our corner of the political spectrum. And so that was really one of the core jobs. And I did that. That was essential to do. So I was really pleased about that at a kind of macro level.
Yeah. You said something before about potentially the right being reluctant or not wanting to work maybe with the Greens now over the environment. Do you think that's just the current government, or because I guess from an observation I can see that there's plenty of people that might say or do say, but we don't want the Greens to have anything to do with the economy. So do you still think with that there can be a way to work together?
It's such an interesting question because I really honestly believe, wrongly, that the right were open to this idea. And then they just took this rabid turn against environment stuff. So you look at the current government we've got. I mean, I was writing up the other day the list of all the anti-climate policies of the current government. It's like 50 policies. It's crazy. Everything you look at, they're just like it's trying to increase emissions and undermine climate policy. But does it have to stay like that, I guess is the question. Right? And I mean, I don't see why it must stay like that, but certainly at the moment, that's where they're locking themselves in. And I think it's a real mistake. If you think about, for God's sakes, renewable energy, right? I mean, China is now putting in more renewable energy than fossil fuel energy, right? A majority of cars now sold in China are electric vehicles, for God's sakes. So in terms of the Greens can't do anything about the economy, I mean, it's farcical, right? You've had this tremendous transformation of the world's biggest manufacturing economy, which is China, right? And manufacturing is hard to transform, right? To make it green, right? It's a big challenge. And they're in the middle of doing it with their energy sector. It's really dramatic, right? It's going to change the future of what happens to the Chinese coal industry, there goes the world, right? On climate change. And so this is happening in real time. So the idea that there's that you can't have environmentalists involved in economics is just laughable, because actually the green economic revolution is happening right in front of our eyes, right? Like right now. And that's driven by all the things that me and people like me have been saying and doing now for 20 years, which has driven a market, which has pushed it in the direction, combined with fantastic entrepreneurs and business people who've invented great stuff. PV, photovoltaic panels, have become super cheap, super efficient, partly the technology, partly the mass production coming out of originally Germany. Remember, they subsidised it there and then China picked it up. It kind of, the leadership on photovoltaics has been passed around. It's amazing what's happening in terms of renewable energy, and that is transforming the world, and that is at the core of the Chinese economic strategy. The world's biggest economy, the biggest, second biggest economy, biggest manufacturing sector. I mean, if anyone who thinks that doesn't know their ass from their head, who thinks that somehow you're not going to have Greens involved in economic policy. We're all through economic policy now. If you haven't noticed it, it's like, come on.
That also should probably give people hope that is happening in China.
I totally agree. It's been a dramatic transformation. I mean, they're still building coal, but they're building far more renewables. Now, I don't think it's enough. It's got to go faster, and we've got Greenpeace has got an office in China, and we're kind of, within the limits of civil society space in China, which are reasonably constrained. We're certainly, pushing the government there to go even faster. But they have done incredible things in China in terms of economic, in energy policy and green technology. And it's driving a lot of what's happening. So Donald Trump's embracing oil, gas and coal, drill. Meanwhile, China's embracing green technology. I just like the New Zealand government, my team did this great press release today where the New Zealand government spending $200 million to subsidise oil and gas exploration, right? It's like we're backing the fax machine. The fax machine's going to beat the internet. Fax machine, that's the way of the future. It's like, are you guys idiots? Like, are you kidding me? You're backing oil, gas and coal? Like, that is not the future of energy on this planet. Like, you might think that you and Donald Trump are going to bring back fossil fuels. Well, last time Donald Trump was in, the coal industry still went backwards because it's expensive and dirty. And sure, you can subsidise fossil fuels, but the fax machine's dead.
Oh, I love that analogy, the fax machine.
Yeah.
Gosh, that was a punishing appliance too, wasn't it?
My God,
trying to send a fax.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And you'd answer the phone. It was like, hello, every time, hello.
Hello.
Oh, no, it's a fax. No, it's a fax. And you'd have to hang that phone up, run to the fax machine. Yeah, no, they're gone. Let's talk about this July. The Greenpeace flagship Rainbow Warrior is returning to Aotearoa 40 years after French government agents bombed the original ship. I must say, I was a couple of weeks ago, I was running one of my favourite runs along the waterfront, and I scooted round the Hilton and bang, wow, there she was, beautiful. I was like, wow, okay. This was such a... This is a massive part of New Zealand history, the Rainbow Warrior bombing. And, this, the campaign to stop nuclear testing and is a huge pivotal part of the fabric of New Zealand. And I feel like I remember writing, early on I wrote an open letter it was actually Chris Hipkins and Chris Luxon, and it was in the early stages of what we saw happening post October 7, but the subsequent action of Israel in Gaza. And I wrote then, and I'm not ashamed in the slightest to say now, I'm so disappointed in our lukewarm, what feels like just a real lukewarm, we don't really want to piss anyone off anymore. We're just sort of sitting there, and I wasn't around, I hadn't quite been born then, but that was the New Zealand that I grew up knowing that we were to be. We were the little guy that stood up to the world, and people went, wow. It's an awesome month. July will be to reflect on that and celebrate that. But what does that, when you look at reflecting on that, but then looking at where we are now, how do you feel about both those things? There's a long question.
I reckon it goes a little bit to the previous conversation about how does change happen and the conflict involved in change, right? So a lot of people look back on that period and imagine, and Jacinda Ardern was one of these people, imagine that the nuclear-free stuff happened through consensus and everyone being nice to each other, right? It didn't. It wasn't a consensus moment. In fact, we now have this, consensus on nuclear-free New Zealand, but we didn't. At the time, the opposition happened to be the National Party, but I'm not trying to pick on the National Party, but they voted against it, right? And so that embrace of a nuclear-free identity for New Zealand, which now seems common sense and it is core to what makes us special, it was extremely divisive back then, and it was not embraced by everyone. And ending the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior in a way epitomises the conflict, right? Because the French government said, we're so pissed off that the Greenpeace is going to sail their boat into the nuclear test zone again, we're going to bomb them, right? And so that was about people willing to stand up for something important, both the part of the nation, but also Greenpeace, those Greenpeaces at the time, willing to take risks to stand up against power because it was important. And that, I think, is important to remember about that time, because sometimes I think people look back on it and think it was kumbaya and we're all in it together and little old New Zealand against the world. Actually, New Zealand was divided then, and a lot of people stood up for it and fought for it, and then it became part of who we are, which is fantastic, right? But I think it's relevant for the climate battle, right? Climate change, the reason I talk about Jacinda Ardern is because in her most recent book, she said she's so pleased with taking the politics out of climate change. You can't take the politics out of climate change. There are these powerful vested interests, largely fossil fuel companies, but also agribusiness, who have a vested interest in continuing to pollute because they make money out of it. And so the idea that we could have achieved a nuclear-free Pacific without conflict is not true. And the idea that we can deal with climate change to cut emissions without conflict is also not true. There is a deep conflict, which is why politics doesn't go away, because there are some things that as a society we are arguing about and can't simply be resolved, because there are these vested interests, largely fossil fuel companies and agribusiness, who do not want to cut emissions because they make money out of it. And I think in some ways the Rainbow Warrior coming back typifies that. It's like, on the one hand, we want to look back on that era slightly through rose-tinted glasses to go, wasn't it great? We were a great leader for the world and we were all in it together, which sounds great, but the truth was we were divided and there was conflict amongst ourselves, just as now we're trying to deal with climate change.
And so it comes back to that full circle at the start. We need the agitators. It's okay to be an agitator. And people being comfortable with conflict. That's essentially what you're saying, right? Is that we're probably at a position where there is going to be more conflict. There is going to be more activism, but there needs to be. Is that...
Well, that's right. And if you want to have a world, if you want to protect the habitability of planet Earth, then you're going to have to fight for it. It's on the line. It's I don't know. I mean, you look at climate science, you try not to be hyperbolic about it, right? Because I don't think it helps to exaggerate, right? The science. And but we really are on track for very significant warming, and that warming will have very significant impact on us and our kids and their grandkids, because it's going to take ages to fix. If that's important to you, you're going to have to fight for it. And don't be afraid to stick your hand up. We need people to be courageous. The people in the 1930s who gave us our democracy, because they fought for it and gave it to us, they were courageous. We have to be courageous now, not only to protect our democracy, but also on these other issues, climate change, biodiversity. David Attenborough's Oceans documentary that you brought up the other day, New Zealand is the last country in the South Pacific bottom trawling seamounts, destroying ancient corals to catch a few fish, right? That is a shame on us. That is a stain on this country that we are still allowing that to happen. We have to stand up to protect the wonders of this planet, and that's going to involve some conflict, because the fishing industry are never going to stop unless the government, acting on our behalf, makes them stop.
So the introverted chap from Brisbane is ready for the long fight then?
Well, the introverted chap from Brisbane has already done enough bloody fighting.
Do you get tired?
So I'm willing to keep doing my part, and I do. But there's lots of other great people, fortunately, and many, many fantastic activists, and the more the better.
I think. Can I ask you what gives you hope?
This is slightly controversial. I don't really like the word hope much. But no, I tell you why, because it's kind of like it's so disempowering, right? I think fight for what's important. Don't hope for it. Like, take action. Like we all, I hope lots of things. I hope that things end up well for our democracy and civil rights, and that in the future people like me don't get locked in jail but are allowed to cause trouble. And that we, do end the fossil fuel industry. I really do, and we stop destroying the planet. I really hope for those things. But you know what? Hope's cheap. You got to stand up and take action and do stuff. Like anyone can hope. Don't hope. Take action.
I'm not going to argue with you. And I think that will... I will come back to that speech where you said, this is 10 years ago, humanity faces some really great challenges in the years ahead. It's a bit of a little psychic thing going on there. But we also have huge opportunities. Human creativity is infinite. Human courage is infinite. And we have the opportunity to create a world of abundance for everyone living within the finite limits of the world. You said to New Zealanders, stand up for a better world regardless of the cost. That's what you said.
I sound like a broken record, don't I? I'm saying the same thing today. Why not? I don't know. So if you think about our societies, not all societies, like my culture, right? I come from a European culture. We developed this idea of expansion, right? We said, we're going to expand, there's so many of us white people all over the planet, right? There didn't used to be, but we kind of went, there's so many of us and we've grown our GDP everywhere and it's like we've used all the resources and there's no limit, right? Well, as a matter of fact, there is. And so particularly my culture, and I own it, we have to learn how to have a good life within limits. That's crazy talk, because that is not what my father thought. My father and his family, they had 6 kids and we just got as much shit as we could, it just goes back to that side, everyone wants to consume more and more stuff. Well, I'm sorry, but, we have to learn how to live a good life within limits. And I think that we can. I think people are up for it. People aren't stupid, right? People understand that. They know they can't keep using more and more stuff. So, let's mature as a species, and particularly my culture that I own, because I love, where I've come from. But this idea of constant expansion of use of physical resources, it can't keep happening, right? And we are, in trying to do this, we are taking away all the beautiful and magical things that we like about planet Earth. We're stripping out all the life, right? We're killing all the sharks. It's like, I'm scared of sharks, but I really love that they're out there, right?
They're awesome.
Yeah, they're awesome, right? And so, in pursuing this ridiculous idea that you can have unlimited growth of physical resources, we are taking the magic out of this planet that we just happen to inherit, which also happens to be the only living planet of which we are aware. I'm sure there's others out there, but there doesn't seem to be many of them so far. So, that's craziness. That is not what we want to do. I think we can have a good life within the finite limits of planet Earth and really enjoy the magic of this planet without destroying it, but also have a good life. You don't have to live in misery. I mean, God's sakes, we already have so much abundance if we share it out. And that's where the social justice stuff kind of comes into play, right? We got to make sure we share. You can't just give it to the billionaires. The resources need to be shared so that most people, if not all people, can have a pretty good life, while also not destroying the life support systems that make this a great place to live.
Fighting is tiring. What do you like to do when you're not fighting? What are your, do you have chill days, hobbies that don't involve agitating and activism? The swimming, obviously. Swimming's a great one.
Well, I mean, I've got my kids, so, they're my number one responsibility.
How old are they?
10, 12 and 14.
Right. So busy with the kids.
So it's real busy. If you got kids, you're pretty focused on what your responsibilities are. It's like, this is my number one job, okay. So, I get a huge amount of joy out of the kids. Do you, just out of curiosity, do you discuss, possibly not to the length and depth that we have, but what do you talk to your kids about? Any of this stuff? Or would you rather not freak them out? Or I don't know, what's the dinner table discussions? Yes, I do. We do talk about it. I do try not to freak them out. But I'm not really freaked out myself. I'm not a freaked out. Yeah, I think
good. Russell's not freaked out. Thank God.
What I mean is, I think we can solve this. I'm not saying we are going to solve it, but we can solve it. So I talk to my kids about what's going on. We don't have telly, so we have to entertain ourselves somehow.
So no telly, no laptop telly?
They're allowed a movie once a week.
A movie once a week?
Yeah.
So do they have phones?
No.
They don't have phones?
Do you know how phones work? There's 10,000 engineers on the other side of the phone who are all trying to make you addicted to their stuff. They're going to win.
Yeah. Oh wow. No, this is interesting because obviously there's a big discussion at the moment about social media and under 16, so they don't even have a Nokia 3310.
So my oldest has just been given a dumb phone.
Yeah.
So that, you know, like because he catches the bus to school and stuff, so that if he needs to ring us up, he can.
Okay. Cool. No, that's interesting.
I mean, you know, the social net, that movie, The Social Network, which I'm sure everyone's watched, but I mean, it's true, right? I mean, that's the business model of these things, right? They are there to get your children addicted. That's their job, and they're really good at it because they pay people $1 million a year and thousands of them to make sure they're going to win that battle. So as soon as you give them one of them phones, then it's. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone should do that, each to their own, but it's tough. Like, it's a tough battle to win.
Yeah. Do your kids sometimes like, oh, Dad, can I just have a phone? Can I just have Snapchat?
Not yet.
Nah.
Maybe later.
Yeah. I will give you your Kiwi Yarns quick fire questions. It's been a wonderful chat.
Oh, yeah, they're right. Yes.
That's all right. You'll I think I can probably predict a couple of them, but we'll go. What kai is on the menu for your final feed?
I think it would be puttanesca. I just love it.
Yeah.
Olives, chili, capers, bit of anchovy, some garlic, bit of passata, nice parsley from the garden. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can't argue with that. Good carb. Go out on a carb.
Yeah.
If I gave you a magic wand to change one thing in Aotearoa, what would it be?
Oh, God, there's so many things. I really am upset about bottom trawling.
Yeah.
Seamounts, 1,000-year-old coral, I would just end that. I just think destroying that, to catch a few fish, I would stop that.
Okay. I don't disagree with you on that one. Sorry, this will just quick side. Why are we still doing it? Why? What? How come?
Governments are overly captured by industry, and so the fishing industry have used their lobbying power to make sure they can keep doing this incredibly destructive thing.
So both sides just bend over to each cycle of whoever's in.
So the previous government was moving towards restrictions on it, and the current government is like, let it all rip.
Okay.
Okay.
Your favourite Kiwi artist or song?
Well, I'll probably Anchor Me. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It is a good song. It is a beautiful song.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where would you love to go in Aotearoa that you haven't been?
I've never got to the Chathams. You know, when you're an MP, you get free air travel, right? And so you can and I used to, because I campaigned on rivers, I was always going all around the country paddling on dirty rivers. I ran a dirty river. I would go and paddle on all the dirty rivers.
So you learned how to kayak pretty quickly?
I did, and I drowned myself. So I went many places, all very remote places all around the country trying to protect rivers. But the one place I never got to, which I should have, was the Chathams. I'd love to go to the Chathams.
Intrigues me too, that place. Now, you're stranded on the Auckland Islands, in particular Disappointment Island. What are the 5 things you'd take to avoid being both stranded and disappointed?
I don't know. I mean, I'd probably books, most of all. Yeah.
Books. 5 books?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, what are you going to do, right?
Well, yeah, you can't take anything that's not sustainable, that's for sure, in your answers, even if it is just a hypothetical.
There's just so many great books around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, 5 books, fine. Thank you for that. That was bloody great. And keep up the amazing mahi that you do, and keep being an agitator, and I hope that maybe you've inspired another new agitator who might be listening to this, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to Kiwi Yarns or watching. That was Kiwi Yarns. We'll see you next week.